Hey, what's going on, guys? Zedd here, bringing you another Soul Calibur 6 video. Today, today's video is going to be the updated version of my Xianghua matchups chart, as of patch 2.2, or in this case, Setsuka release. That patch actually had quite a bit in it in terms of balance changes, and a few of those changes directly impacted Xianghua. A lot of the changes made to some of her good or bad matchups changed in that way as well. So I'm going to go through a few things just before we get into the placement. First off, I think that Xianghua came out in a really good position in the patch. So keep in mind that this is not a tier list. Okay, let me repeat that. This is not a tier list. It is much too early for that. However, it is or rather, my thoughts on Xianghua's matchups for now going forward. And I feel like I'm able to do that because a lot of the matchups that she had, rather the matchups that changed, only changed a little bit or a lot, and you can obviously read the patch notes and see how those matchups would have changed. So I assessed them, I played them, and so anyway, yeah, it's not a tier list. This is my updated matchup chart. I also haven't done this in quite a while, and my last one it aged okay, but there were a few changes I wanted to make, and you'll also notice right away that I actually changed the format. So I truly think that Xianghua's matchups, for better and worse, um, got closer to even. So I'm actually shaving off the 6.5, 3.5 both ways, because I don't think either of those exist anymore, technically speaking. So I'm only going to make 3 different tiers, favored, even, and unfavored, but I'm going to say whether or not, I'm going to talk about each matchup, and note that it is actually going to be in order. So what that means is from the left of favored to the right of favored goes from favored closer to even, and within the even tier you'll notice it's better to worse, and within the unfavored tier it's from best to worst. So the far left of favored to the far right of unfavored is going to be the order within reason. Like, this isn't cut and dry. You know, if I put a character 2 positions lower than another character, don't think too much of it, but I tried to order it to some degree, uh, just to try to move things along a bit better. So, with that said, if you see me put a character somewhere and you disagree, try to tell me why, but I am very confident in this list, and I'm going to explain quirks of each matchup as we go. So, let's get right into it. So first up, we'll start with favorites. So Xianghua's best matchup, 1-for-1, and we're gonna put Maxi here. So Maxi has always been Xianghua's best matchup. This hasn't changed. If you guys have seen my other charts, you'll know that I still feel the same way about this. However, with Maxi, unfortunately, he's the biggest loser of this patch by a mile. His Heaven's Guard was dramatically nerfed to the point where it's barely usable. You're basically able to low him to death out of stances again. So to kind of sum it up, he's essentially Season 1 Maxi with a little bit of buffs to his frames, just because of the Season 2 patch, and a pretty decent soul attack. Like that's actually all Maxi is. So if you were capable of beating him in Season 1 and you feel like Heaven's Guard was too strong, which it wasn't, by the way, then you should be just fine against Maxi now going forward, assuming they don't change that, but that's not going to change the fact that it is Xianghua's best matchup. The reason why is her auto GIs are really, really punishing on Maxi. In general, her I-12 CE is absolutely disgusting. It makes some transitions completely impossible, and one of the only ways, if not the only way, he can deal with it is using PSL, which is the horizontal auto GI, into neutral guard, or NG, which is the vertical, and so he has to go like ting ting double green, and that is the biggest commitment Maxi can make, period. Okay, and that's because it's 912 CE and it has iframes, so it really screws up some of his pressure. So this by far is Xianghua's best matchup. But again, I wanted to shiv off the highest and lowest tiers, but Maxi, super good matchup because of the auto GIs and the I-12 CE for the most part. Next up would be Valdo. Where is Valdo? Valdo. So Valdo, again, always been a pretty good matchup for Xianghua in general. The reason why is the crouch throw essentially negates Mantis's existence. The only kind of moves that beat crouch throw from Mantis are if he jumps, which is a really big call out, or if he goes for the KB, and that only works now since they sped it up a little bit. But even then, it can still trade on some transitions, so you're not taking the full brunt of the damage, and he's not resetting the Oki, so whatever. Although in general just isn't the strongest character right now, so that does play a role in this, obviously. But Xianghua's speed and like I said already, crouch throw really shut down Valdo. He struggles to stay back turned against Xianghua, which is kind of where he wants to be. And front facing Valdo against Xianghua just can't keep up with her in terms of speed. In general, and yeah, any of the crouch throw characters just really put a damper on Valdo in general. So it's another one of her very good matchups. Talim is next. Talim. So Talim, again, another character that is just, or not another character, but she's a character who is very polarizing. Either people know how to play against a character and it's super easy, or you don't and you get destroyed and you think she's broken. There's very few people out there, at least in the grand scheme of things, who think that she's totally fine the way she is. And so that can make putting her in matchup charts quite difficult. Now, I'll explain. As a player, I'm not the best at dealing with Talims who are very aggressive and very button mashy. I don't really handle mashy players that well. But when I play against in a somewhat more competitive set where the pacing's a bit more slow, I do just fine. And again, on paper, like Xianghua does fantastic into Talim because Xianghua can play neutral. Her auto GIs are super powerful against Talim. Her CE is super powerful against her stances. It's kind of like Maxi in that respect, where Xianghua has stronger neutral, and the I-12 CE really does shut down the stance game. And if you take away the stance game from these two characters, what do they really have left? That's kind of the gist with Xianghua. General, the auto GIs, the I-10 as well, that stuffs a lot of the transitions in general. So it's just, Talim has a hard time running her game against Xianghua, and that is very much so true. Next up we have Grow. Grow, he's a super annoying character, right? I don't think any of us like to deal with his soul charge, but that's kind of it though, right? When he's not in soul charge, he's kind of a meme, at least in the matchup. And the reason why is the I-12 CE and the I-10, you're going to hear this a lot, for the record. The CE punishes a lot of his best buttons. What I mean by that is a lot of his best tools are minus 12 or 14. His stance transitions in general get stuffed by I-10s, all except for one, if we assume on block, and that one, I believe, is the guard break, or the break attack, rather, which obviously is steppable. So on block, specifically, Grow has an incredibly hard time doing anything out of stance, whereas at least against characters where their fastest move is I-12 5A or I-12 2A, he can at least on some transitions get the Avenger B, which is the fast up slash. And so he doesn't have zero options, whereas Xianghua makes him have zero options because the I-10 is just too fast where nothing beats it on block. So that actually, surprisingly, shuts down this character a lot. Other things, though, like her sidestep tech crouching attacks or her just tech crouches in general, really strong in the neutral game. And her auto GIs. So her auto GIs shut down. Like, Grow isn't a very string heavy character, but the couple of strings he does have are pretty good in general. But against Xianghua, they're super risky, right? And so that's what makes it pretty spooky for him in general. So Grow, frankly, just becomes a very vanilla character in the Xianghua matchup in that he can't really use his couple of stance transitions and he can't really use his strings. And you can say that about a lot of the cast, but Grow really relies on Avenger for any serious pressure. Because past that, he doesn't have a whole lot, and you might as well just play a character like Sophitia or Geralt at that point. So, really good matchup for any character who has an I-10. Yoshi, Taki, Raph, not Talim, Amy, Cassandra, Xianghua. Grow is really good for all of those characters. Or rather, he's super weak into all of them, so they'll have a good time. Next up, we have 2B. Now, 2B actually, walked away this patch with some pretty solid buffs. Now, it may not seem obvious at first. She's still the same character. Like, let me be clear. She's still the same character. I still play against her the exact same way, and that is play neutral, punish everything that's minus 12 with CE, crouch throw AGS loops, and you're good to go. And those reasons alone is why she's still up here. You guys know this from past charts. She didn't go anywhere. All of these matchups, frankly, haven't changed. So far, nothing new here. But just to clarify, so she got extra extension or buffs to some of her really, really terrible strings, like 6 BBB, for example. And her soul attack hitting grounded now is actually kind of a big deal. That's allowing her to beat out some situations where Crybaby in the matchup was kind of a beats all option. So that's really good for her, but past that, the matchup hasn't really changed. So still a great matchup, but the character herself did get buffed, so it should be fun to see what happens to her going forward. But matchup still very good for Xianghua in my opinion, and yeah. Moving on, so we're actually going to put the new girl here. Now, hold on, you keyboard warriors. Oh. Where'd she go? There she is. Now, before you guys even dare say, but Zedd, it's too early to call. Okay, you have to remember that Setsuka is a legacy character, okay? A lot of the DLC isn't necessarily. So, or they're completely redone. Setsuka is very much a similar character to her previous installments, and so therefore I can pull from Legacy to put her in a matchup. As well, holy man, have I only ever played against Setsukas of all skill levels, both professional, scrub, and everything in between, or X-Pro with Setsuka as their main. Okay? Let me tell you something about Setsuka. Holy man, do people overrate this character. At the time of this video, people are making claims that she is the Leroy for Soul Calibur 6, and for those who don't know, Leroy is a Tekken 7 character who on release completely broke the game, and if you go and look up EVO Japan 2020, there were six Leroys in top 8, which is a joke, and people are seriously saying that she's as strong as that. No, I'm sorry. If you believe that, I don't know what's wrong with you. You're just not playing the matchup well at all if you think that's true. Claim intended. So the reason why Setsuka is a favorite matchup for Xianghua is Xianghua doesn't let Setsuka do what Setsuka is built to do. So if we think about, say, Talon or Maxi, right? Talon and Maxi shut down, or Xianghua shuts down their kits in general via stancing, right? It's a little different with Setsuka. Xianghua disables Setsuka from playing the game at all. And what I mean by that is it's more like Grow, in that Setsuka wants to counter hit and whiff punish and punish. Those three things, like those three huge, gigantically important, immensely important defensive aspects of Soul Calibur, all of those things are what Setsuka is best at. If you look at her moves list, you'll notice that her strings are really obvious. There's no string mix-ups. There's no mix-ups in general other than 1K and her throw game, which it's not bad, don't get me wrong. But she's not much of an offensive character, right? Like, she wants to play neutral, she wants to whiff punish you and counter hit, like I already said. But what happens when you fight a character like Xianghua, who is super safe? I can play, this is a true story, I can play the entire game with Xianghua using only safe attacks. Okay? So just think about that for a second and tell me, what is Setsuka supposed to do against that? Okay? The other thing is the couple of strings that Setsuka does have are very much not hit confirmable. Like, there is probably one or two that are, but having gone through her moves list and looked at them, there's really no, or rather, there's no reason not to finish them because they are immensely punishable. Which means that you just really can't use those buttons against Xianghua because auto-GIs, and all of them except for one, I believe, are auto-GIable. So, not to mention the crouch throw, but I'm not going to get into matchup specifics yet. The idea is if I play a stupidly safe neutral game against Setsuka, there is nothing she can do about it at all. And it didn't matter how good the Setsuka player was, I was forcing them to only use essentially lows and throws because that was all she could do. And so if you take away these key strengths from Setsuka, she's very much a run-of-the-mill character. Sure, she's rather safe herself if she wants to be, but her unsafe stuff is where she really gets the beefy hits and the good damage, right? So I won't go on too long. We'll make a video about Setsuka shortly in the near future, going into more detail, but I think this is Xianghua favored. I don't think anyone's going to change my mind right now. Yeah, I really don't see it being... At worst, it'll be 5-5 in the future, but I am not sold on that at all. And, oh, sorry about that. Yeah, that's my thoughts on the Setsuka matchup. Sorry about that. That one was a little long, but I know that she's the new character, so people will be like, eh. Yeah. Moving on. So next up we have Geralt. So Geralt, this one's going to be a little bit of a, I don't want to say it's a hot take, but it's a little bit controversial in a sense. So Geralt, the common consensus from a lot of Xianghua players I've talked to think that Geralt is a even or bad matchup because of his range. Well, I don't really think that that's true. I don't think his range is a big problem at all. Maybe back in Season 1 when we were still learning how to play and stuff, but not now. That's not a big deal. The reason why I think Geralt is favored is he just cannot mount any kind of offense at all. Which means, or without being like -12 or -14 or taking big risks on low reward lows. Which means that we have all the freedom in the world to use our safe moves over and over and over. Like, you frankly don't even have to worry about mashing into Geralt, save for his parry, his 4A plus B, right? There's that. A lot of his best tools are -12, like a lot of them. And just in general, when you play really safe against Geralt, he just kind of struggles to get the W. He's a very vanilla character by design. I think he's a good character though. But in the Xianghua matchup, he just can't really keep up. He doesn't hit hard enough. That's the biggest issue, I think, in the matchup, is Geralt doesn't swing hard enough to dissuade Xianghua from just pressuring him to death. And his 4A plus B is a big commitment. It can be easily baited. And just doesn't really have the ability to control Xianghua. The best thing he can do is use his basic buttons. AA, BB, 3A, 2A, 2B. And that's it, really. That's kind of all he can do, and that's not enough to beat Xianghua as a character. You can't just play super vanilla like Soul Calibur against her because you're just gonna lose. So I think it's favored, not by much though. We're getting into the like not so favored but still favored section of the list. I think he's a favored matchup by a bit. I just think he can't keep up with her in general. And like I already said, a lot of his best tools are -12, and that is a big deal in the Xianghua matchup, as I'm sure you guys know, right? So that's the main reason. Like, if you don't agree with anything I just said, take away the fact that his best tools, for the most part, aside from basic buttons, are like -12, and that's a big deal. So anyway, that's my thoughts on Geralt. Somewhat favored matchup. Moving on. Okay, so these next three, there are three more in the favored category, and you guys are gonna hate me for it. But just hear me out. So next up we have Mina. Okay, shush. Settle down. Settle down, children. Mina is a favored matchup for Xianghua, don't at me. And the reason why, especially now, is I mean, it's always been favored for Xianghua, really. But they nerfed her full crouch 1kk to the point where you have to finish the whole string in order to get a knockdown and decent damage, which means that it's very predictable. It's not as worth the risk now. So the risk is still there, but the reward is significantly lessened. So now that singular powerful up close tool that Mina had is now gone. She's still a strong character though. don't get me wrong, and she can still butcher you if you aren't playing good defense. But if you have good defense and you understand how to play around her various tipper range attacks, holy man, this character has a hard time dealing with you. She has to rely on things like crushing attacks that are punishable, meaning she evades attacks as well as like tech jumps and tech crouches, right? She has to use punishable or steppable auto GIs, right? Via 6k and 4k, I believe it is, and then her 4b plus k as well. She has to rely somewhat on those. And then in general, her punishment game just isn't really there. So as Xianghua, even though she's a very safe character, you can kind of get away with using some more powerful but punishable attacks in the Mina matchup, which is nice. And in that sense, Mina just, you essentially smother Mina and there's nothing she can do. Whereas in the past, she used to be able to just, if she gets a good read on the full crouch 1k into, you know, Oki mix up, and it's a nightmare, right? But now that that's gone, this matchup is even easier than it used to be. While she's still a strong character, don't misunderstand me, matchup got easier, and so therefore now I can say with confidence that it's in Xianghua's favor. But again, we're further down on the favored list, so it's not by much, but it is definitely Xianghua favored. Hiya, okay. So Azwel, I hate this character, okay? I just hate this matchup. I hate fighting him. I hate everything about him. Not as much as I hate the next character we're going to talk about, though. But I don't think that he's as good as a good chunk of the casual player base makes him out to be. He is very overrated by the masses. And in this patch, too, his swords got nerfed and his shield got buffed, which didn't really matter that much. Realistically, all this character has, truly, is about 2 good moves in each of the weapons, maybe 3 if you're pushing it. And so if you understand that and you know what those moves are, you know exactly what to look out for, you can figure out exactly how to play around them. And the new change, I forgot to mention this with Mina too, the new change to soul charge, or rather resist impact, where if you use resist impact against a soul charge character, they lose 25% of their meter. That's a big deal against Grow, but then Mina and Azwel especially, because let me tell you right now, Azwel, it's such a bait to use his soul charge attacks. That's not what you should be using it for at all. It's used for the fact that he is almighty, and therefore his frame data is completely perfect in a way. Because if you don't know, Azwel is -8 frames on the next attack if your next attack is of a different weapon. So if you use a sword attack, your next sword attack will be fine frames. But if you use an axe attack, that axe attack is now 8 frames slower. But when he's in almighty mode, that means that he has access to everything at the +8 frames. So that's really why Azwel's will soul charge, or why you should soul charge as Azwel. It's a good defensive tool. So now that we have counterplay to that to reduce it, and they also made it so his weapon arts take more soul gauge, and in Mina's case, her soul charge can be very annoying to deal with, but again, just RI it. That's a tool that these characters now just really have to think about before they hit that button, and so you can rush down these characters more than ever. And you do the same thing with Azwel as you do Mina. You just smother him to death. And when he's in sword, he has no lows. He doesn't have access to a single low. That's a sword that's not slow and telegraph. So you can just keep beating on him over and over and over and over. The only moves he has to really fret over are like in axe mode, you have 3B, full crouch 3B, and of course axe low. That's kind of it. In sword, you can pretty much 2A all of it. And again, there's no low. And then in shield, the auto GIs don't really do anything other than kind of kill your momentum. So I think he's very overrated. I think he's okay character at best. But I think actually as time goes on, he isn't going to be that great very, very soon here, if not already. So yeah, I think it's favored for much the same reason as Mina, and this patch really enforces that with the resist impact change specifically for Azwel. Now, the last favorite matchup for Xianghua is my least favorite matchup on the planet, and that is Astaroth. So, as you guys probably well know, if you've watched my stuff for a while, you'll know that I hate this matchup more than any other matchup in the game. And the reason why is quite simply, I don't like losing to a coin flip. And there are games where you kind of just have to look to yourself and be like, it'd be like that sometimes. And honestly, that's what playing against Astaroth feels like. If you get perfect at it, you just say, it'd be like that sometimes. And I hate that, right? I hate the fact that a trash Astaroth player can just, in theory, grab me, what, 4 times? And I'm dead? I hate that. So anyway, I hate this character so much. But the truth is, as much as I struggle in this matchup as a player because it's a personal thing, my character is super good against him. Like, Xianghua has so many tools to deal with Astaroth, it's not even funny. So, her crouch throw is great. Her CE is great. Her auto GIs are incredibly strong against Astaroth. Her recently buffed Hu Li, which is B plus KB, is amazing against Astaroth. Absolutely insane because it's tech crouch, ton of damage mid, and it's a bit of an approach tool. It is so good against Astaroth. On top of so many other things like full crouch 3A, 2-2B, 2-2A plus B, auto GIs, CE, crouch throw. I think I already said that. Like, she just has so many things to deal with him. The only thing that he has going for him in this matchup is strictly damage, and that's not enough. And you're gonna see when we get a bit further in the next categories, like, just damage or just movement isn't enough to really sway a matchup in that character's favor, and Astaroth is no exception. So yes, he hits like a truck, and you know what? Sometimes he's just gonna perfect you. Frankly, it be like that sometimes with Astaroth, and you just kind of have to take those L's and just run with it. At least that's the only way I can stay sane against this character. So yeah, I think that it's Xianghua favored by a mile. I just personally, as a player, need to work on it a little bit more, but I know that she has the tools to deal with him more than sufficiently. Okay, so that's it for favored, like I already said. So moving on to the even category. So in the even category, first up, we're going to have, so for the record, these are like basically all 5/5s. You can put the very first person on even and the very last person on even and flip them, and I'd be like, alright, sure. Now, some of these are going to be somewhat controversial, so just bear with me and hear me out. Alright, so first up, Rugi. I feel like this one, like, you know, he's Rugi. It is what it is. They recently nerfed his damage quite a bit. Like, quite a bit. So I might even go so far as to put him in favored. But just as a general playstyle, he can kind of, he can make us whiff. In general, he can play pretty safe. We have some advantages over him, but his damage and range somewhat makes up for it. He was one of those characters where I think it's even, but I really think, like, if you were like, no, it's Xianghua favored, I would agree with you. I'd be like, sure, I agree. I believe you. Why not? But I don't think he's that good of a character, and so I feel like my bias of him on the tier list is what would make me put him in favored as opposed to him actually being favored in the matchup. So I feel like it's even. But with his damage nerfs, they might be more significant than I think they are. I played against a couple of Rugis to see it. I still felt the same about the matchup, but I think the character got nerfed in general, but I think it's an even matchup. But you could say it's favored for sure. I wouldn't argue that at all. Next up, Cassandra. Cassandra, again, this matchup honestly can go either way. She hits like a truck when she's in Soul Charge or Divine Force. But the thing with her is she really just wants to be high APM, right? Like, she really wants to be hitting buttons. She wants to be in your face. And playing like that against Xianghua is a risk, right? I feel like that doesn't really need an explanation, but it is. So her 6BB, a risk. 6-6BB, a risk. 3AK, a risk. 2-2K hold, a risk. Like, there's just a lot of risks she has to take to use her offensive sequences and her really good frame attacks. So I think it can go either way. She hits like a truck, like I just said, and so in that sense, she can sometimes outspeed Xianghua. But Xianghua's kit in general prevents Cassandra from going a little too ham, and so if you can, she's kind of like Cassandra is kind of like a bullet, right? If you don't put anything in front of her, she's never gonna stop, in a sense. But if you can put a brick wall in front of her, she has to stop, right? So, and Xianghua kind of is that brick wall. She has all the tools to make Cassandra chill out, right? And so therefore, I think it can go either way. Um, yeah, that's my thoughts on Cassandra. Moving on, where are we here? Taki. So Taki kind of, it's actually very much the same as Cassandra. If you can just make Taki hit the brakes a little bit, all of a sudden you're in control. The other thing too with Taki is a lot of her moves either tech crouch or can be crouch thrown, which is quite interesting. So Refstar was actually incredibly strong in this matchup. Well, not surprisingly, but it's shocking how powerful it really is just to throw out and hope it works. Taki's punishment, or not punishment, Taki's lows are pretty weak, with the exception of her 1K, which isn't that bad. And so Xianghua doesn't really have to fuss with the low blocking, which means that in a lot of situations, you only have to worry about mids or highs, and then horizontal, vertical. And here's the thing is, even though Taki players use a lot of her kicks, a lot of her kick attacks are actually pretty bad. And so Xianghua's auto GIs all of a sudden gain a lot of value in the matchup for that reason. If your character doesn't have strong kicks, you can expect a Xianghua to use her auto GIs, right? I think it can go either way, though. I've played against some of the best Taki players, and honestly, it goes either way. I think that if you let Taki play her game, you're going to lose, but Xianghua very much has the tools to prevent that from happening. So it's a 50-50 in a sense, or a 5-5 rather, matchup. Next up, I have Kilik. Kilik, very, very vanilla character, very run-of-the-mill. He has a little bit of everything, right? Range, up close, decent frames, a good poke low, heavy hitting low, good whiff punishment, decent post auto G, or decent post GI. Just has a little bit of everything, right? And because he has a little bit of everything, when I think of Kilik, I really do think of kind of a jack of all, master of none kind of character. He can flex into a lot of matchups. I feel like his matchup chart's probably fairly even across the board. I can't say that with confidence, but the problem with that though is he doesn't have any like big X factor that you're like, wow, I gotta watch out for this, or I gotta be worried about this. The only thing that's even remotely close to that is his soul charge and the various throws and combos that can go into the critical edge. But they've nerfed the damage on those throughout the patches, so they're not as scary as they once were. So just to reiterate, he doesn't really have a wow factor that you're worried about. So therefore, you can kind of just go all out and play your game, and there's not a whole lot he can do about it. If you play neutral against Kilik, it's either step or duck. He doesn't really have any horizontal mids that you have to mess around with, at least in neutral. And Kilik, a lot of them will love to use his 4A. The thing with his 4A is that while it is only minus 12, it does leave him in a crouched state. So, oddly enough, it is one of the matchups where Kilik has to think twice about just throwing out this low, because if you happen to block it, obviously you can CE it, but you can do that with like any low, basically. Yeah, any low in the game. But you can actually crouch throw it, and that's a big deal. It's actually a big deal. So Kilik has to think twice about using this low that normally he can just keep using. So in that sense, I think it's even. He can hit like a truck when he wants to, right? On counter hit especially, can be pretty damaging. But in general, if you just play a really tight, solid game, you're fine. So I think it's pretty even either way. Again, I don't think he's that good of a character. Much like Rugi, I wanted to put him in favored for Xianghua, but I felt like his strength was dictating that more than the actual character. So again, if you were like, nah, Kilik should be favored, I'd be like, sure, no problem. I believe you. No argument from me. And yeah, so he was just another one of those characters that I wasn't 100% sure should go here or up. Next up, we have Raphael. Raphael, super strong character, like really strong character, but thankfully we have the tools to make him think twice about what he's doing. So Raphael, what gets a lot of people is the fact that they think that he has just like the best offense and the best defense in the game, which I think is a fair argument. You could say that, and how do you really argue that? But the thing with Raph is when he's in preparation, if you understand that if he goes for the various kick options he has, like, so prep K, right? If he goes for that, big risk. If he goes into, what's it called? AG. If he goes into AGK, super reactable. And if he goes into QPK, super risky, right? And Shadow Evade K just isn't very good. So his kick options from his various stances just don't really see as much play as his A and B options. So therefore, Xianghua can again, if she wants to, I can just make a call out with an auto GI, and there is nothing he can do about it at all. Oddly enough, too, her crouch throw actually gains power in this matchup because a lot of times what Raphael wants to do in a perfect world is go into Shadow Evade and hit the B, right? Because Shadow Evade B is one of the highest guard damaging moves in the game and is very, very fast. And so, and if you step it, the Shadow Evade A gets you. But if you're quick on the trigger with Xianghua's crouch throw, you can grab him out of Shadow Evade, which is a pretty big deal. Her 4BA and CE are also fantastic tools to deal with his stance. The 4BA, just as a reminder, is a high mid. So again, some of the transitions and some of the sequences he would do, it's kind of a catch-all option in that sense. So like I said, the auto GIs is well a big thing against him, and the CE, this is just a common trend with any stance. Her I-12 CE frankly stuffs most stance transitions in the entire game, and Raphael is no exception at all. So yeah, it's a pretty even matchup. He definitely has more range. But kind of like Setsuka, where he in a perfect world, he really wants to punish you. If you can't punish the character you're fighting against, what do you do, right? If you're a character like that. Anyway, so that's kind of my Cole's Notes thoughts on the Raph matchup. He's a really good character, though. Don't misunderstand. Next up, we have Yoshi. Yoshi, again, really powerful character, really annoying character. A lot of people hate this matchup. Or, not the matchup, but they hate this character. But the thing is, Xianghua actually has a lot of tools to stuff a lot of Yoshi's gimmicks, which I think is a really big deal, because even some of the highest rated or most talked about Yoshi players out there somewhat rely on his bullshit, for lack of a better term, or his shenanigans, or his gimmicks, whatever you want to call them. And Xianghua forces characters to play very basic, boring, honest caliber. And you'll notice this trend throughout the list. Like, oh, you have stances? No, you don't, against Xianghua. Oh, you're a punishment character? No, you're not, against Xianghua. In Yoshi's case, you're a gimmick character with some strings? No, you're not. Sorry. And that's a big deal, right? So if you make people play a very boring version of caliber, all of a sudden a character's power level would, in theory, dramatically go down. And Yoshi, while he can be very overwhelming, you have to remember that Yoshi's pressure, for the most part, is very, very much focused around mental pressure and mental frames. And that's a topic for its own video, so I won't get into it. But the gist of it is, Yoshi isn't as plus as you think he is. The scariest thing about Yoshi, obviously it's his full crouch 3K online and up close. That move's pretty spooky. But the scariest thing about Yoshi is when he raw stances. That's when you really want to be shook, because how do you lab a raw stance, right? How do you read a raw stance transition? Well, you don't. So really that's the best that Yoshi can hope for in terms of gimmicks against Xianghua. Um, yeah, it can go either way. I don't, I'm not going to say I love the matchup, but I actually quite enjoy my games against Yoshi players because both characters kind of have to play a little more honestly than they normally would, and it's quite a bit of fun. So I think it can go either way. Next up here we have Zas. Again, super strong character. Like, don't get me wrong, we have three of the best characters in the game, just one after the other here, but um, kind of like Raph, Xianghua has the ability to put his various strings and stuff in check. In the kind of mid-level Zaz play, one of the most common moves you'll ever see in series is his 3A. Now his 3A, it is a good move. It's a horizontal mid, it's pretty quick, and the follow-ups are 3AB, 3AB hold, and 3AK. And with all of those, Xianghua herself has tools to beat or punish all of them. And so with that, the what becomes overwhelming pressure from Zas becomes a risk for him against Xianghua, because if he goes for 3AB hold, she can 6A plus B it on reaction. Okay? And that's a big deal. He also has a ton of moves that she can CE punish, and a lot of them are his best attacks. Another example is his 6-6A. His 6-6A, if you don't know, is a double slash that he can delay. But Xianghua can OS it, and by OS I mean option select, in which if he doesn't delay it and she hits a 4A, which is a horizontal auto GI, it won't come out, and she can punish with, well, she can punish. But if he does delay, then the 4A comes out and it automatically GIs it, and he can't choose to do only one slash. So that's just one example. But Xianghua definitely has the tools to deal with him, as well as her high being I-10 means that his CE, while it already has the weakness of not being able to work against her if she doesn't have curses on her, it can also stuff a lot of his CE setups, because if you look at the frames, he needs like a certain amount of frames to set up the CE, and sometimes her I-10 can just deal with it outright. So it can go either way, but still a strong character for sure. So next up we have Sophitia. Now Sophie received some pretty appropriate nerfs in this patch. She was a bit tricky for Xianghua before, but now that you know, in general the verticals have been tweaked, and now that again the soul charge counterplay of RI is a thing, all of the little things that they changed about the game did impact Sophie, and therefore impacted the matchup. So this is kind of my first example, like I said, Astaroth, where her movement is good, but it's not enough. It's not enough to make it unfavored. I think that it can go either way. Remember how I said that Xianghua kind of forces you to play a somewhat basic game? Well, Sophie can do that, right? She can do that very well. The thing with Sophie, though, is now that they hit her 6-6B's tracking, and you can actually step it pretty easily, she's now having to use 6-6A more. And 6-6A is -12. Okay? So, all of a sudden, against a character with an I-12 CE, it's going to be a lot harder for Sophie to deal with us stepping now, which is a pretty big deal. In general, the couple of strings that Sophie does have, they're all auto-GIable for the most part, I think. And you just have to play good neutral against Sophie, which is hard. But at least as Xianghua, we have the ability to I-12 punish everything with CE. Everything. Sophie Stab gains essentially 0 value in the matchup. And you can even go so far as to say it's a bit of a reverse mix-up, with Xianghua's AAB being -14 on block, but then you have, of course, the retreating auto-GI, which can catch stab, so that is one little piece of tech that can be useful. So yeah, I think it's a 5-5 in general. If you struggle against Sophie, it's probably just because Sophie is the way she is. I don't think it's a bad matchup. I think that she's a pretty strong character, and she can be a little hard to deal with if you're not comfortable playing neutral and fundamental Soul Calibur. Like, if you rely on very gimmicky offense, or Like if you rely on PXS or you rely on the auto GIs or stuff like that, Sophie's going to be a really rough time for you, for sure. You have to play good, solid caliber to beat a good Sophie player. Next up here we have Hilda. Hilda, this one can go either way. I think she's a solid character. The best thing that we have over Hilda though is that well, much like Sophie, the couple of strings she does have we can completely delete or negate. But the biggest thing that we have going for us in this matchup, at least in my opinion, is that one of her strongest aspects is her Oki. Like, if you took away Hilda's Oki, she would be a pretty low tier character. Just, it is that powerful. It really is. Or it can be. Like, her tech traps, crazy. Her Oki options, crazy. Her setups, like after different knockdowns and stuff, super good. But Xianghua can kind of delete most of that with, of course, Crybaby. And so, that's a really big deal. It really is. And kind of like Sophie, you have to play good neutral, but Hilda also kind of struggles to get you off of her, oddly enough. Because her charge A attacks are so powerful that in a perfect world, you don't want to be using A attacks, you'd rather be charging, or you'd rather charge your A attacks, but that doesn't really work, right, against Xianghua. I will force you to use A and B. You really won't be able to use that many charge attacks at all, and you have to try to contest my pressure and speed. And so if you call out that Hilda is going to try to, say the Hilda goes for shoulder bash, which is minus 12, you know, if you call that out, boom, it's a free CE, right? I think it's a 5-5. I think that she's a pretty solid character, even like, especially now, they buffed her in ways that she needed, and yeah, it can go either way. It can go either way. In general, she has a lot of horizontal mids that are good though, and so that can be a bit of an issue, but yeah. Next up, we're still in the even category, by the way, even though I can tell you right now that most people are looking at this and being like, so every other option here is unfavored, right? No. We're not done yet. Alright, so Ivy, this one's probably the really hot take. Like these four in general, Mina, Azwel, Astaroth, Ivy. I know a lot of X players would be like, man, what are you doing? No. So with Ivy, the biggest thing about Ivy that made it an unfavorable matchup, like by a mile, the biggest thing, was that Xianghua couldn't punish Christmas Tree at all. And the way that Xianghua's offense would work, you could kind of just throw it out and it would work. And that sucked. Like, that was a big deal, actually. But now they've made it so that it is consistently punishable. At least I haven't found a reason or a way that it isn't. And so all of a sudden you're going to start seeing Christmas Tree a hell of a lot less against Xianghua. That is a huge deal. Like that is so dramatic that alone made it go from unfavored to even. Because that was the only thing that Ivy had to get you off of her. Because if Ivy, here's the thing with Ivy too. Having an I-12 CE is freaking cheap against this character. I mean, it's just cheap in general. But it's super cheap against Ivy because so many of Ivy's best buttons are all minus 12. Like, all of them. Any move, so here's a fun little tip for you. I think for the most part this is true. Any move you see that Ivy uses that makes her sword turn into a whip, so anytime you see the blue trail, or the pink weapon trail, you can almost always CE punish it, assuming you're in range to do so. Always. And so, if you play against her with that in mind, holy man, does it make her life a lot easier. Her 2-2K is her only low to worry about, and then CS, I understand it's super hard to break online. I know. I trust me, I know. But it's doable. And offline, it's very much doable. Summon Suffering is reactable, and not as easy to buffer in, just by the nature of the movement. And her 2-2A is a really common lethal hit that you'll see. That's her sidestepping high. It's minus 12. 2-1-4B, if she goes into stance, all you have to do is step duck. Easy. Her mid-range game, super predictable, easily GIable. The other thing that's really good about this matchup now, and this is one of the few changes that Xianghua actually received, is that Xianghua's 4A plus B lethal hit now vacuums in. So in the past against Ivy, you used to have to use the 8-8 B plus K auto GI or the 4A auto GI. The 4A auto GI would still sometimes whiff, and it's very low reward. And the 8-8 B plus K auto GI at max range would still sometimes whiff, and it was a real tragedy. But now, every single time an Ivy tries to hit you with 6-6A hold, you can 4A plus B it even at max range, which is actually a big deal. Big deal. So that change, the 4A plus B change, and the Christmas tree nerf, both like really swung the matchup back into a 50-50 split. I might even, this is crazy. I might even go so far as to say it's actually Xianghua favored, but I'm a little hesitant to say that for now. But you know, given another patch or a few months, that might actually be true. So if you struggle against Ivy, I understand. She has a very, very vast toolkit, very frustrating moves to deal with. But if you just relax and understand that the only offense she has that in terms of up close pressure, essentially 2-2K, 2-2A, Christmas tree, and CE, you'll be fine. I promise you. Alright, next up we have Haomaru. So this character, this character's annoying. I don't like this character at all. But the recent change they made where, and I thought this was intentional, but his 214K, which is his right here, where he swings at you with his jug as a Ronin cancel technique, it's -8, I believe. Apparently that was supposed to be considered a weapon attack, and it wasn't up until this patch, which is actually a big deal. Because that move alone, after his Ronin cancels, would control the matchup. That move in his 6B would be like, what do you do about it? Well, all you can do about it is attempt to GI, but that's a huge risk. Or go for a 4-4 B plus K vertical auto GI, which is again a huge, huge risk. Because you're getting 0 reward if you're wrong. Or if he baits it. But now, his good Ronin cancels are 6A plus Bable, and even if you're wrong, you're barely taking any damage from the other options. Like, at all. So, his Ronin cancels now are super risky for him to do, against Xianghua anyway. His 6B, yes, trust me, oh man, it's still a frustrating move to deal with. But you can deal with it. And if you block it, he has the warrior stance transition. Just step duck the stance and you'll be fine. Okay? So those two factors kind of swing it in Xianghua's favor now. Whereas pre-patch, I would say it was an unfavored matchup because of the jug as well as his movement and 6B. So all three of those things were big things for him. But his movement is still really good, don't get me wrong. He is going to backstep you, but thankfully we have tools to deal with that. So kind of like Sophie, the movement it's just not enough for me to go, oh no, it's unfavored, at least with the jug. So if they didn't change the way the jug worked, I would still keep him unfavored. The other thing they changed that matters, I almost forgot, was his 4-4K lethal hit where he would just leap in the air. Or his 4-4K move, he would just leap in the air and jump lows and lethal hit a crouching opponent. They nerfed that. So now you'll see that less. And again, the jug being 6A plus Beable, huge deal. Huge deal. So all he has going for him now is 6B and movement. Everything else is kind of whatever. So now the matchup is even, but you will have to deal with some really good movement. But if you can deal with that, he's fine. And last up in the even category is Tira. So Tira, just like Haomaru, her movement is insanely good. Insanely good. But holy man, is she ever punishable. At least by Xianghua. The strings that she has, huge risk. The just playing in Jolly at all, I can literally CE everything you do. And so that's a big risk in general as well. In in Gloomy Coda, if you ever go for the like the 3BB and I'm right and I can 6A plus BU, which like not saying you have to use that move, but if you want to, you really don't want to. Yeah, she's just really punishable. She's a good character though. I think she's a good character. But it's just like against Xianghua, she really risks a lot by using any button. Again, whether it's auto GIable or CE punishable, Tira just has to deal with that. And the only thing that Tira really has going for her in the matchup is the fact that her movement is really, really good. And so she can backstep a lot of the stuff that Xianghua wants to do, which is a little annoying. But again, past that, I don't think she has much going for her in terms of the matchup. So that'll do it for the even category. So now we move on to the unfavored category. So first up on the unfavored, we have Cervantes. So Cervantes, this was a character that I was actually flip-flopping between a lot. I spent the most time on him deciding where I wanted him to go. Either it was going to be behind Tira or the top of unfavored. And I thought about it and I'm like, I think I'm just really comfortable in the matchup, but I do think it's Cervantes favored, but not by a lot. So much like so again with the favored characters like Geralt, really, it's not favored by too much, but it just is. And with the unfavored, I think that it's not Cervantes favored too much. But holy man, can he ever keep Xianghua at bay? Kind of like Sophidia, if you're not comfortable playing a solid, fundamental, neutral game, he's going to destroy you. And even if you are comfortable doing that, he could still very well destroy you in general. Thankfully, a lot of his good moves are either punishable or auto-GIable. So you do force Cervantes to play a very boring, lame game, but honestly, that's what Cervantes likes to do anyway. So he's really good at that, and his range just really shoves Xianghua out of her effective range over and over and over and over. So it's more of an annoying matchup, but it is definitely winnable. I don't think it's too much in his favor, but I do think it's in his favor. Next up, we have Amy. So Amy got a 4 AA damage nerf, which I believe is 4 points of damage. So if you eat that 5 times, which you're going to eat it more than 5 times, but if you eat it 5 times, that's 20 less damage that you would have taken, which can add up. And even when you're below 30%, that really adds up. Like when you're in yellow health, that move really doesn't do much damage at all. But the thing with Amy is she's very safe, and she kind of just outspeeds Xianghua. So while I think Xianghua has more counter tools and defensive options than Amy, Amy's offense is significantly stronger than Xianghua. But the kicker is it's not that auto-GIable. So Amy, just by design, like, she can cancel a lot of stuff. Her kick attacks are really good. A lot of her stuff, you just don't have frames to auto GI. Like the strings or the transitions, they're too tight for the 4-frame gap. You can either only GI or you have to block, kind of thing. So her offense is super good, and so her and Xianghua, they kind of have the exact same effective range. They really do. It's just that Amy's offense, frankly, can't be countered by Xianghua's counter tool, which is weird, but it's true. And so in that sense, Amy just gets to go without having to worry about anything Xianghua can do about it, and there's not much Xianghua can do about it, and what she can do about it, Amy doesn't have to worry about. And that's the issue with the matchup. It's not like Cervantes, right, where just him playing the game is like you don't get to play the game, or Tira or Haomaru where their movement is super good. No. It's that Amy is a very aggressive character, and oddly enough, her defense just cannot really be auto-GI'd by Xianghua. The other reason why is her horizontal, vertical, and kick options out of her different pressure tools are all really good. So it becomes just a straight guess if I want to try to auto-GI. So to kind of sum that up for you, Amy simply outspeeds Xianghua to the finish line. She's just going to win faster than Xianghua, usually. Not always. And this is assuming Red Rose Amy, because getting Red Rose Amy is super freaking easy. If you can prevent Amy from getting any roses though, oof. Yeah, she doesn't have much over Xianghua, but as soon as she gets those red roses, yikes. She is a pressure monster, and there's not much I can do about it. Or Xianghua can do about it. Next up we have Siegfried, and lastly, I'll just do them at once, Nightmare. So, holy man, so Siegfried hasn't really changed. So we'll get him out of the way first. He hasn't really changed. One thing that changed on him, though, oddly enough, it may seem trivial, but it does matter to me, is that his 3A4, his slap, it used to sidestep a bit, and you used to be able to respond to that with either B plus K or A plus B as Xianghua. So if you go for the A plus B, you can cancel into PXS and then BB, get huge damage, or if you used the new Holy, you could get some serious damage and really good advantage. Well, but now they fix it so that interaction doesn't happen, and the 3A4 is just going to slap you, period. You can still PXS under it, thankfully. The problem with using like A plus B2, for example, against Siegfried is his A slide B, his Jess frame, that hits PXS, and that's actually a really big deal. If that didn't hit PXS, this matchup would be hilarious, but it does. And so Siegfried literally can just keep you out almost the entire game. Approaching him is really difficult. Your guard is going to get hit a lot. It's just a bit of a rough matchup. And in general, his base hold, his B plus K, the fact it just constantly auto-GIs horizontals is actually a big problem for Xianghua to deal with, as she herself doesn't have that many slow horizontals that are threatening. So you can't really catch him out of the stance. And he can just throw it out and be like, okay. While she does have a safe launcher, well, two, it's still a great move in general. The matchup's just tricky, and really, if Siegfried's smart, he won't pressure you that much. He'll just play a very slow, boring neutral and keep you away, a lot like Cervantes. Nightmare is, in this patch, big caveat there, in this patch, I think it's Xianghua's worst matchup. Now, let me be clear. Nightmare as Xianghua's current worst matchup is better than her worst matchup was pre-patch, okay? So any way you slice it, this is all a straight buff for Xianghua. But I'll get into that in just a minute. The reason why Nightmare is her worst matchup now is they tweaked some small things on him to make him now able to deal with some of the things that he could not deal with. Let me explain. So previously, if you wanted to punish PXS AA on block, you had to use either 3K or an instant input 236 A plus G, his low throw. But that was actually really hard to do. It was inconsistent. Now that they made it 12 frames, that is consistent. He can do that every single time, which is a big deal. So he actually, funny enough, has one of the best ways to punish PXS AA in the game. Whereas normally that was relegated and exclusive to Xianghua herself. Xianghua, Astaroth, and Cassandra could all crouch throw it. And while while Nightmare could, it was incredibly difficult for him to do. But now he can. And so, you know, PXS AA was super spammable against Nightmare. Now, not so much. Another big thing they did to him is they made his AGA, or ABA, I always forget, +2 on block now, assuming you get the Just Frame, which is also a big deal. So now, what happens is, he can just go relinquish, and there's really not much you can do about it. And if you try to challenge him, all of a sudden Nightmare at +2, remember how his frame data is a little slow, Nightmare at +2, he's a standard frame data character now. So now you have to watch yourself, right? Her armor busting moves, like, yes, her full crouch 3B busts armor. I get that. But It is now steppable, so it's not as spammable against, well, any character, but especially Nightmare. It's not as spammable, so, and frankly, every other armor busting move she has other than that is kind of not as good as some of the cast. Like, some of the cast have good moves that you can just toss out and they happen to break armor. That used to be the case for her full crouch 3B, but now you have to be more wary of that attack. Her lows are still really good, yes, but it's more just the range, the damage, and the neutral. And Nightmare got buffs in a couple of those areas. So now I do consider it her worst matchup. Is it still winnable? Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Like, she doesn't have a single 3-7 left anymore. I don't even think she really did before, but I think 4-6 is her worst matchup, and I think that these four characters, or rather, not all four. I think that Amy, Siegfried, and Nightmare are 4-6s for Xianghua, and Cervantes is more like a slightly favored. So that's my thoughts on her current matchups. Just to kind of give an overview, her worst matchups got better for her, and her best matchups either in some cases got worse, or her best matchups kind of just stayed her best matchups. Like, they didn't get tools to deal with it. Like, there was nothing, for example, like Bro didn't get anything that makes him, even all of a sudden, right? He remains one of Xianghua's best matchups. And so she actually, even though she herself didn't get a whole lot other than quality of life, um, the fact that her worst matchups got nerfed a fair bit is a big deal, right? You have to remember that that's how balancing works. If you adjust one thing, all of a sudden that's going to buff something else about another character, right? And she actually came out on top in this exchange. Um, so yeah, that's my thoughts on the matchups. Um, yeah, and if you want further explanation, I can go into that. Let me know in the comments if you disagree, but make sure you give me a good reason. I don't want to hear someone be like, Ivy's really hard to deal with. Why'd you put her in even? You don't know what you're talking about. That's not a valid argument, right? Um, but yeah, I'm happy to go in depth about any of these. If you let me know in the comments, I'll just respond with my thoughts. And yeah, I think Xianghua is really strong this patch because look at this matchup. Like, if you assume that what I'm saying is right, there are 4 characters in the game that you don't want to pick her into. That is really good. Like, that is absurd. And so based off of this, like, half the roster is 5-5, and almost, 2/3 of the roster is favored. Like, that's hilariously strong. And so I think Xianghua is laughing this patch. Even though she herself didn't get much, everyone else not getting anything, and damage nerfs across the board really buff up Xianghua a lot. So, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.